Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Sonic the Hedgehog here, aka the Blue Blur, aka Blue Justice, and I am back for the likes of the Maxi Toys videos. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more Let's Play of Sonic the Hedgehog 4, specifically Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2 for the Xbox 360, for the Xbox Live Arcade, PlayStation 3 for the PlayStation Network Store, alongside with the phones of PC Steam, and finally iOS smartphones, except on the Wii, because obviously though, the WiiWare does not contain Episode 2, because as I said before, probably because of the graphical limitations. So, last time we've essentially did manage to traverse into two zones in particular, which appears to be Sylvania Castle, alongside with the forms of White Park Zone. In addition to that, we also did manage to collect 6 Chaos Emeralds, just like the forms of how it does it in Episode 1, within the first two zones in particular. So yeah, everything else checks out there. So yeah, today for this video is that we're going to be continuing things on and move on to the third zone in the game, which appears to be called Oil Desert Zone. So generally speaking, it's about the fact that now out of all of the actual zones in this entire episode, I believe Oil Desert Zone is perhaps one of my least favorite zones in the game, in my opinion. I mean, nothing horrible or anything, but until when it gets to the point until not only for Act 2, but as well as Act 3 in general as well, which obviously, though, I'll talk more about that if we somehow dive into this particular zone. So either way, though, I mean, after all, though, it's about the fact that I believe we're now on to the halfway point in this particular episode already. So generally speaking, as I said this before, this particular episode is extremely short, much like the forms of how it does it on Episode 1, as well as Episode Metal as well. So hopefully, though, we will able to actually guarantee to get ourselves the 7th and the final Chaos Emerald, and not only for the sake of the Episode 2 game, but as well as the entire Sonic 4 saga, because as far as I'm aware, that I just don't understand why, about the fact that we have to collect these all 7 Chaos Emeralds again, and during the forms of him in a gap between Episode 1 as well as Episode 2, because I still don't understand why that Sonic 4 wasn't meant to be an episodic in the first place, but still. I mean, mind you, about the fact that it's been about yesterday since we've last played this game for sure. Generally speaking, it's probably because, as I stated before, so many times already, that we just want to get these games done before we move over to the forms of, you know, Sonic X Shadow Generations coming up soon, but that's besides the point. And speaking of which, though, is about the fact that, well, today's date, of course, there is the 20th of October today, in some cases in 2024 today, so generally speaking, is about the fact that we've only got about exactly 5 more days to go now, until Sonic X Shadow Generations was expected to be releasing at some point. In addition to that, though, is about the fact that I'm pretty concerned about the fact that we've only got about, I would say, 18 more days to go until Mario Luigi Brothership is going to be releasing. So generally speaking, yeah, not long now until that particular game is going to be releasing. And I suppose no matter what, though, is about the fact that I'm pretty sure we've only got about, I would say, around 3 months left until Donkey Kong Country Returns HD is going to be releasing on the Nintendo Switch. I mean, the only thing I was really expecting for is about the fact that I don't think it's possible about the fact they were able to actually bring amiibo functionality for the likes of Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, much like the forms of how it does it on most Switch games up to this point, especially concerning for the fact that, well, I suppose general, though, is about the fact that the only Nintendo Switch game when it comes to 2024 that does able to actually have amiibo support, that's what appears to be by the forms of, I would classify for saying, The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, because that's as far as I can try to describe it. Although, mind you, about the fact I haven't exactly touched upon that game for a while, since when it first launched, especially concerning for the fact I still need to get a lot of practice when it comes to how the mechanics worked, and also how the combat system plays out to be, and you probably get the idea about that. So, as you can see, you see those little danger signs right there? Those look very familiar to you, because as I stated before, since in yesterday, those signs are heavily borrowed from Sonic Generation. Clearly, no matter what, though, is about the fact that it actually signifies there's going to be some bottomless pits, so you do definitely need to avoid those at all costs. So either way, though, and the last part right here is about the fact that we have to use the tag action with Tails, and then you have to deal with the wind as well, And generally though, once you pass through that carefully though, we were able to actually access to the 7th and the final special stage in not only in episode 2, but the entire Sonic the Hedgehog 4 as a result. Which then again though, we'll talk more about details more about it during at some point until next Saturday or Sunday, depending on the forms of how the fact that what we're going to be planning for, especially concerning for the fact, as I say this before, I'm still incredibly excited for Sonic X Shadow Generations is coming up. So either way, and here we go on to 7th and the final special stage, and this special stage is quite tricky, especially concerning for the fact that not only do you have to memorize where the ring placements are, but as well as that though, is about the fact that there are certain segments that you have to be super duper quick about it, and not to mention though is about the fact you can't afford able to get hit by too many bombs so many times. So, but I digress though. There's also another thing worth mentioning for actually, is about the fact that in regards to the forms of some new patch updates has recently been revealed, not only for the likes of Super Mario Party Jamboree, ever since in Journey forms have been the 16th of October roughly, but it's also same applies with the forms of NES World Championships, well let's just say Nintendo World Championships NES Edition. So for instance, with the forms of Nintendo World Championships NES Edition, I believe that particular game is now on to version 1.1.1. Seriously, 3 ones in a row with that particular update patch. The only thing they only touch upon though is about the fact that they did stated this. They fixed an issue where the play screen display was miscalculate or accurate in relation to the personal and world best replay screens. I'm pretty sure that's what they fixed. And when it comes to the forms of Super Mario Party Jamboree though, much like any other Nintendo Switch games up to this point, as soon as you're able to actually get the game for reals, you're able to actually have to force able to actually deal with this mandatory update, which is of course version 1.1.0. And what updates did they bring us into? Well, they did somehow address 5 things. Like for instance, they fixed a bug where the number of times you start on an unlucky space is reset when you resume from a suspended save in Mario Party mode. And they also fix a bug where items that appear in sky-high cannons are on top of the cannon, which renders players unable to get the items. So yeah, I guess it's that. And they also fix an issue where they fix a bug where an error occurs and the game closes when the Nintendo Switch console is removed from a dock while on the reward screen after clearing Area 10 of Toad's Item Factory. So, and also they fix a bug where when users clear Area 10 again after it's already been cleared in Toad's Item Factory, the scene of getting party points doesn't play and the user does not get points. And finally, they fixed some other issues to make the gaming experience more pleasant. So yeah, that's as far as we can able to talk about in terms of version updates for certain games in particular. So also about the fact that I've honestly have no idea why, that for some reason though is about the fact that there might be some censorship is about to be going on in regards to the forms of Rouge the Bat's character design when it gets to the point when Shadow Generations is on its way, because well, straight to the point though, they somehow managed able to, well, let's just say censor the forms of the back portion of her wings or something like that for Rouge anyway. But I'm sure enough that was about the fact that we'll talk more details about that until at some point in the future. So either way, so there we go folks. Once again, we've collected all 7 Chaos Emeralds, so you know what that means. It's time to able to turn to Supersonic as soon as we get on to the next level. And just like before, you need to collect 50 rings, and then once you do collect 50 rings, we have to press the triangle button, and I believe on the Xbox version, you have to press the Y button. So yeah, that's why I classified that. Oh god, this music sucks! Ugh, I hate it so much. So yeah, this is what I mean about the fact that it's nothing bad of the zone, but it's just that the musical track choice, it sounds awful, especially during the evolves of not only for the sake of Act 2, but as well as Act 3, which we'll get to that in a moment. So, as a result though, it's about the fact that, well, we'll have to stick with it, I'm afraid. So either way though, so yeah, if you use the rolling combo right here, and quickly jump off this particular oil stuff, and that way you can get yourselves a red star ring from there. Although, I was expecting to try to able to go after every single red star rings as much as I can, but I'm afraid to tell you, I haven't exactly got a clue of certain locations for certain stages, mainly in Journey Evolves in, well, let's say in Act 3, in Sylvania Castle, alongside with the Forms of White Park Zone, because as I stated before, it's been ages since I actually have last played this game for sure, because, well, I'm pretty much more accustomed to playing through not only Sonic Mania, but as well as Sonic Superstars as well, because obviously that was about the fact that despite the fact that we had to redo our playthrough of Sonic Mania now, especially concerning for the fact that, well, obviously though, while looking back on it though, the commentary is pretty bad, and on top of all that stuff though, is about the fact that the entire, well, structure of this entire Let's Play is actually a bit of a mess. Like, as a result though, we did the exact same structure as the forms of how it does it in Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, back in Journey Evolves in 2017. However though, I will admit though right away, the amount of views we've got back then is pretty low, so as a result though, I feel like I'm about to be doing something a little bit more completely different this time, but we'll stay tuned for that at some point in the future, so... But I digress. So anyways though, so let's just go and try to avoid those specific hazards here, and we can able to actually turn into Supersonic right here. So just in case we can able to become invincible and also try to go ridiculously fast and what have you. So yeah, everything else checks out there, and as a result though, we can able to actually go ahead and go up, and why there's so many speed boosters there. I can able to actually take control of my speed, thank you game. Although, to be fair though, it's probably because no matter what though, although the physics in this particular episode is not exactly perfect by any means, as I stated before, but I still think it's a little bit better than episode 1 to me. But either way though, that's all I can really think about it, so... Also, about the fact that there's actually a new trailer just came up, specifically a teaser trailer for the upcoming Wallace & Gromit's Vengeance Most Foul, not only for the sake of the films of the UK version on the BBC version, but as well as the Netflix version internationally, including the American version as well. And also I just realized about something is about the fact that the actual release date on the Netflix version, specifically the international version, I believe is about to be delayed a little bit during at some point until early 2025, specifically the 3rd of January in 2025. Although meanwhile in the BBC version, it's still going to be coming until this coming Christmas, especially concerning for the fact that it did state this on the Wikipedia, and I'm going to say though, I'm still very excited about the films of Wallace & Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, especially concerning for the fact that, well, the actual main premise of the film, as far as the actual storyline is actually focused on, well, obviously though, is about the fact that Wallace was innocent. So because of this though, in fact there's actually a brief description about the falls of this entire premise of how the film actually plays out. Gromit's concerned that Wallace is becoming too dependent on his inventions, proves justified when Wallace invents a smart gnome that seemed to develop an evil mind of its own. When it emerges that the fatal figure from the past might be masterminding things, it falls to Gromit to battle sinister forces and save his master, or Wallace may never be able to invent again. So yeah, generally speaking, I was about the fact I'm still very curious to know how that's going to turn out. So anyways though, also speaking of which though, in regards to the forms of Super Mario Party Jamboree, that I suppose out of all the actual modes, I suppose I totally forgot to mention about this actually, that one of those modes in particular, which appears to be the Paratrooper Flight Score, well, apparently though, you can only play as 2 characters on that particular mode, which appears to be both none other than Mario and Luigi, something very similar to the forms of how it does it in Mario Kart Live Home Circuit, depending on what specific set you get. So, although I'll explain more details about this in a second, because as you can tell, on Act 2 in Oil Desert Zone, there was actually that particular item that we somehow come across into. That's what appears to be by the forms of this very peculiar button mashing kind of quick time event, which you'll see why again during at some point once we do manage to find that particular item I was on about earlier. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that yeah, I think it's this part right here. So yeah, you see that particular item box up there when you try to deal with a team up icon? Well, basically though, as soon as you're able to obtain it, you have to mash the button as quickly as you can to able to actually obliterate its enemies that not only can get so many rings as well as several points. So generally speaking, I was about the fact I'm pretty sure not able to actually just keep on mashing your button is by simply pressing the X button, or specifically the Xbox version is more accurately the A button, or technically the PC Steam version, assuming if you do have the controller support with you, but I digress. So either way though, as you can see on the stage right here, despite the music is still pretty bad around here, but regardless of everything else though, every once in a while though, it's about the fact that we have to avoid being crushed on this part, because otherwise though, if you dare get crushed, obviously though, you have to restart that particular segment again. So all in all though, this stage is not too shabby. It's just about the fact that the music soundtrack is just awful in general when it comes to Oil Desert Zones. That's the reason why. There is that one particular reason that Oil Desert Zone is perhaps one of my least favorite zones in the game, although nothing even compares until later on though, which again, we'll save that particular topic for later. So here we go on to the boss fight in Journey Forms of Oil Desert Zone, and we're going back into this familiar song, which as a result though, yeah, who could possibly thought that was a good idea to able to choose that particular music choice? I mean, usually relatively speaking though, not only because it's repetitive, but it's also about the fact that it just feels a bit, well, kind of out of place, especially concerning for the fact that it sounds a little bit off too for me, especially concerning for the fact that, well, you get the idea for this point. So, and relatively speaking though, it's about the fact that this is perhaps one of the most slowest boss fights I ever have to face up against, and this one appears to be this little Eggman's metal giant. So generally speaking though, Eggman just somehow gathers a lot of garbage scrap metal, and as a result though, he turns himself into a ginormous, well, scrap metal figurine right here, or this particular robotic thing, whatever you want to call it. And potentially speaking though, as I said this before, is about the fact that this boss is incredibly slow, and it's also very boring too. And no wonder why I'm not a big fan of the forms of Oil Desert Zone. Although generally speaking though, it's about the fact that when it comes to the forms of the, you know, inspiration from one of those zones in particular from Sonic 2, mind you. Oil Desert Zone is basically based off from Oil Ocean Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 2, except the fact that obviously though the background is a lot different, and thus it does manage to take place in a desert, so, or should I say a scorching desert, because you know, the desert is usually it's incredibly hot and stuff like that. So if you ever played The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, including Tears of the Kingdom, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, but I digress. So, yeah, because potentially speaking, I was about the fact that, yeah, it's not possible we can able to play as everybody in the forms of being a paratrooper flight school, because as I said before, is that both Mario and Luigi are the only playable characters on that particular mode. So, yeah, it's kind of, you know, kind of fine as it is, especially concerning for the fact that, well, obviously though, that Mario is pretty much used to with, like, utilizing wings from the likes of the wing cap from Super Mario 64. That could be also applies for maybe for Luigi as well. So, well, mind you about the fact I, sort of still busy playing through, Super Mario Party Jamboree recently, especially concerning for the fact that at this point in time, I do need to unlock all of the boards now, especially concerning for the fact that it does take a bit while to able to try to, unlock certain achievements and stuff like that in order to able to actually keep on getting some ranked up medals and stuff like that. But that's as far as I can think about it. So, also, I thought it was a little bit interesting is about the fact that in one of those boards in particular, which appears to be Rollin' Raceway, there's only 2 star spots. So, usually, relatively speaking, one of them is actually on the, one side, and then the other one is almost near to the bridge. So, and as far as I'm aware, is about the fact that it does kind of remind me like a similar kind of star place system from the likes of the, well, it's hard for me to explain, because I do know for a fact that it's been about quite a few days ago since I actually have last played any other previous Mario Party games up to this point, because as I stated before, I'm playing the most recent one, which is of course Super Mario Party Jamboree. So even though I still managed to enjoy the game regardless, although it does have some issues though, I will admit it though right away, but we'll save that particular topic until whenever we decide to do that Let's Play in the future. So either way, so use the rolling combo right here to stun him, and then once you deal with the last hit, well, there goes the boss fight in Oil Desert Zone. So I'm very appreciated that boss fight is done and over with. Before we move on to, presumably speaking now, the greatest zone in the game, apart from one exception to this, and you'll see why if we somehow managed able to dive into this, basically. So either way though, and that concludes Oil Desert Zone, so I'm very glad this is over. Well, at least to me anyway. So, and there's also another thing that's worth mentioning for actually, is that it's about the fact that one of those modes in particular, which is of course Bowser Kaboom Squad, I believe you can only choose between 3 different stages. There's the forms of Charging Chucks, Bomber Bills. Seriously, they've now called it Bomber Bills nowadays, especially after the events of the Mario movie after all. But anyway, as you can see, we now ended up in the 4th zone in episode 2, and that's what appears to be Sky Fortress Zone. And in Act 1, as you can tell, it looks very familiar, doesn't it? Because as a result, it's basically Sky Chase Zone. However though, I will admit it though right away, Act 1 in Sky Fortress Zone is also very slow too. Not only because it is very slow and is also dragged on for an auto-scrolling level, but it's also about the fact that, well, it does have a lot of emphasis on trial and error sometimes, because as you can see, we actually come across into those Eggman looking crates, because otherwise if you don't keep up at all, like, as you can see, if you manage to let the tornado somehow get stuck, you obviously transport to somewhere else, and as you can see, if we dare get crushed, then we have to restart this entire stage again, despite the fact I didn't activate the checkpoint. So, regardless of everything else though, it's a good thing we did somehow grind as many of those extra lives as we could up to this point. But thankfully though, it gets a bit better as soon as we get to Act 2 as well as Act 3, despite the fact that it will bring us a bit of a challenge. So either way though, and I believe no matter what though, in addition about the fact that when it comes to Act 1 in Sky Fortress Zone is obviously inspired by Sky Chase Zone from Sonic 2, and relatively speaking I was about the fact that in regards to the forms of Act 2 as well as Act 3, it will be inspired by Wing Fortress Zone, also from Sonic 2, except your noticeable difference is this time that Metal Sonic, if you couldn't tell from that particular cutscene familiar, he somehow now got himself his own ship. So yeah, that's actually kind of interesting to say the least, but there's nothing we can do about it for right now until whatever we get to towards the end. So I will say that Act 1 is going to be super duper lengthy, especially it might took about, let's just say, for about 6 minutes or so. Oh yeah, and every once in a while though is about the fact that as soon as we're able to actually keep ourselves moving, well basically though we have to do a bit of a timing thing. So as you can see that we have to go through automated sequence, and basically though is about the fact that you can only move up and down, and as a result though you have to press the square button, as you can tell, to perform a tornado spin technique. And as a result though, not only does it decimate enemies, but as well as certain objects as well, like Eggman's crates for instance. So yeah, generally speaking, I was about the fact that I will say though, this is the most boring level, I will say, because especially noticeable concerning for the fact that, well, as I said this before, it not only is incredibly slow, but it's very too darn long, especially concerning for the fact that, well, again, it will start to get a bit better until Act 2 as well as Act 3, not only because of visual presentation, but as well as the fact that we might be familiar with that familiar level layout from the likes of being Sonic the Hedgehog 2's Wing Fortress. So, anyways, back into what I was saying about the forms of Bowser Kaboom Squad in Super Mario Party Jamboree, that there are only 3 stages you can only participating in for. Like, for instance, there's the Charging Chucks one, as well as Bomber Bills, which I have no idea why they somehow called those things nowadays after the events of the release of the Super Mario Bros. Movie, because I'm almost assuming it's going to be Bonsai Bill, but that's not the case this time around, so I suppose that makes it a little bit more up for it. So, And I do apologize for my tongue twist in the end, folks, but that's just because, as you can tell, I'm just gonna have to concentrate on this part, because if I somehow got distracted, well, I'm gonna have to restart this particular process all over again. And relatively speaking, though, is about the fact that, again, if you mess it up at one point, then obviously, though, you have to restart that particular segment again, so... And there's also the third stage, which appears to be Typhus, which is inspired by one of those enemies from not only from Super Mario 3D World, but as well as maybe Super Mario Odyssey as well. So generally speaking, that's as far as I can really try to think about it. Also, out of nowhere, that Analog is actually going to be working on a Nintendo 64 consoles. Yeah, that's actually pretty good, especially concerning for the fact that, well, obviously that was about the fact that Analog does a really dang good job when it comes to likely getting themselves their own versions of their familiar Nintendo products, including the Sega projects during that time, which as a result, though, previously they did done Analog SG, which is obviously inspired by Sega Genesis, and on top of that, they also did done Analog Pockets, which not only you can play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance games, as well as other handhelds as well, ranging from the Sega Game Gear and Atari Lynx, if I could recall that. Well, mind you, I still haven't exactly owned it for myself, but that's just mainly because I'm still basically stuck with my Game Boy Advance SP, despite the fact that the battery life has been going horribly wrong these days, especially concerning for the fact I had my Game Boy Advance SP for 20 years now, so because of that though, yeah, I might try to get the hand of it at some form or another, but we shall see. So, in terms of the forms of the Analog's next projects they're working on, that's what appears to be the Analog Nintendo 64, which not only does it contain the other controller, but as well as from that though, you can able to actually play N64 games in 4K resolution. So yeah, I'll talk more about that in a moment, once we get to the next act on Sky Fortress Zone, because as you can see, we now ended up against the forms of Metal Sonic right here, and all you have to do in this particular part right there is about the fact that, as you can tell, that's what the tornado spin technique decides to come into play, and basically though, every once in a while though, is about the fact that there might be some familiar enemies from Sonic the Hedgehog 2 will come into play, and as a result though, you have to perform a tornado spin move in order to be able to reflect that particular cannonball right back at Metal Sonic's ship, and then once you've done so for about a couple of times, then you move on to the next act. So generally speaking, that's as far as I can usually try to think about this particular level, I guess. So, I mean, it's just a very simple boss fight. I mean, nothing right to hum about. So, anyways though, in terms of features they somehow got, in terms of the forms of Analog 64, obviously though, when it comes to the forms of specific compatibilities though, it does manage to have the compatibilities of the original Nintendo 64 game cartridges. Not only that though, it's 100% compatibility, and not to mention though, it's region free, so this means you can able to actually get yourselves the Japanese game, or the American game, depending on what specific game you decide to go ahead and go buy. And as a result though, thankfully though, we don't have to worry about modding the actual N64 to begin with. Oh, there's actually a trophy if we somehow defeat Metal Sonic in Act 1 in Sky Fortress Zone. So either way though, look how ridiculous the amount of score we've got for the time bonus, despite the fact that, well, much like in episode 1 though, if you manage to let the timer reach up to 10 minutes, obviously though you get a time over, so it's probably best you have to do this level ridiculously fast. So anyways though, so now let's move on to Act 2. What I will say though is about the fact that when it comes to Act 2 as well as Act 3, these stages in particular is by far the best stage in the entire game of Sonic 4 Episode 2, not only because it's exhilarating, but it's also about the fact that, well, it's a lot more action-packed more than anything, despite the fact that obviously, as I stated before, Act 2 and Act 3 is almost inspired by, well, Winning Fortress Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 2, except this time, Tails is now joining with us this time, because unlike before, that he gets left behind in the actual tornado, because obviously though with this unexpected laser, Journey forms that particular beginning portion of the level. So, anyways though, as far as I'm aware, it's about the fact that it's also going to be compatible with original accessories, means including the original N64 controller, alongside with the forms of the controller pack, and especially noticeable with the forms of the expansion pack is also supported built in, so yeah, you can able to play Donkey Kong 64 without needing to worry about trying to buy the separate Nintendo 64 expansion pack now. And when it comes to video support, well, obviously though, as I stated before, it will actually support 4K HDMI output, and on top of that, they also include NTSC and PAL support, so yeah, that's actually really good. And lag 3 and 0 signal degradation or something like that. And also they've shown us original display modes within CTR or CRT and PVM models and vulnerable refresh rate. So, and on top of all that stuff though, there are some other features they will somehow include, and those are 2 USB ports like charging or wired support, and there's also an SD card slot including a 16GB SD card, and on top of that the Bluetooth Classic or LE, and 4 original style control ports, much like the phones of the actual Nintendo 64. So yeah, everything else checks out there, and I'm pretty sure it might able to actually contain 2 different color variations, which are white and black versions. So, and as far as I'm aware, the price tag for that particular system itself is going to be $250, at least specifically if you lived in America. Now, I'm pretty sure enough though is about the fact that the pre-orders of Amalog's 4K N64 console was about to be begin until tomorrow, specifically on the 21st of October. So, yeah, that's as far as I can try to say about that, I guess. So, anyway, so as you can see right there, is about the fact that there are several sections in Journey Forms within Act 2 right there that we have to able to walk on the forms that familiar thing right there ever since in Deadline from the likes of Sonic Rush. However though, I felt it was a little bit tricky to able to navigate this thing sometimes, because now we actually have full control over it, and on top of all that stuff though, we have to avoid a lot of hazards, including the actual jet boosters, because as far as I'm aware, much like the forms of how it does it in Sonic Pocket Adventure, that if you get hit by those jet boosters, then you get a knockback and it sends you plummeting down to the bottomless pit down below. Unlike in Sonic the Hedgehog 2, those fire boosters never hurt you because they're just part of the background image. So, anyways though, so that pretty much does it for Act 2, not too shabby. Now let's move on to Act 3 in Sky Fortress Zone. And as you can see, much like the forms of how it does it in Sylvania Castle though, we actually come across into a different type of day, which this time around though, it appears to be sunset. So, pretty cool aesthetically for the background either way. Well, mind you, I do apologize for my commentary, because it's a little bit slightly awkward sometimes, but that's just mainly because that's as far as I can try to talk about in terms of something new just came out. Although there's also another thing it's worth mentioning for actually. Moana 2 were able to actually bring a villain this time. That's what it appears to be her name was. Matanga, or Magtangi, I think is what it says anyway. Now, I'm very, very optimistic to able to check out Moana 2 at some point, and on top of all that stuff though, is about the fact that at one point, during the films of the original concept art, or specifically originally though, from the likes of that particular Space Jam A New Legacy, originally though, they almost tried to able to actually include the Pokemon characters in Journey Forms of Space Jam 2, but it was removed in the final film, mainly because no matter what though, they just don't want to get ripped off from the likes of Nintendo side of things or something like that. I mean, back in the day, especially concerning back in the well, let's just say in the Pokemon the first movie, all the way up to Mewtwo Returns, basically though is about the fact that at one point that WB did manage to get a partnership with Nintendo at one point when it comes to Pokemon anime and stuff like that. But every once in a while though is about the fact that ever since in, I would say, in 2001 or something like that, and onwards, it's actually been moved on to a different partnership when it comes to filming industries or something like that, ranging from Maramax or something like that. So usually I keep referring to as the ones they did done Pokemon Forever, Pokemon Heroes, and Pokemon Jirachi Wishmaker, and on top of that, my least favorite Pokemon movie ever, which is of course Destiny Deoxys, because I still cannot stand about the forms of one of those characters, which is Tori. Like, I understand what the forms of bias, I guess, but still, I just seriously am not a big fan of the 7th movie in terms of the Pokemon movies, in terms of, well, anime stuff in general, so... But yeah, that's as far as we're able to talk about in terms of the forms of new discussions alike, although I would have liked to explain about the fact that they brings us quite a lot of items they somehow introduced in the forms of Super Mario Party Jamboree, but let's just say about the fact that it's probably best if we let, I don't know, Maxie will mention more about it, probably at some point when he's able to actually finish up everything, or almost finishing up everything, I should say, in regards to the forms of Luigi's Mansion 2, but we shall definitely see what happens, so... Anyways, let's get onto the spring here to able to actually get onto this platform, and we have to be very careful around here because obviously though, I get the feeling there might be a red star ring in here, which, dang it, I didn't escape in time. Oh man. Although I will say I do like this kind of challenge, especially concerning for the fact that after all, this particular place is filled to the brim with bottomless pits and stuff like that, because we're in the skies above to be expected, so... Anyways, let's go ahead and... Oh, snap. Okay, there we go. That was the definition of a close call, because I can imagine if I do somehow screw this up, then I'll have to restart. Oh, no. Cancel that, thank you. Oh yeah, there's one thing you might able to realize about the fact that when it comes to using Supersonic in Episode 2, it's always nice, just like the forms of how it does in Episode 1. However though, you can able to actually cancel out the Supersonic transformation by simply able to activate the tag action. So as a result though, it's nothing aggravating. Well, it's might be a little bit annoying sometimes, especially if there might be some mandatory segments that you have to force able to use the teamwork efforts in order to able to try to bypass through several parts and stuff like that. So, but I digress. So that pretty much does it for Act 3. Now let's go ahead and move on to the boss fight in Sky Fortress Zone Showdown in the Skies. I think that's what it says anyway. And right from the start though, I get the strong feeling we might fight against with Metal Sonic again, ever since in White Park Zone, except this time it's going to take place in the skies above. However though, whenever I managed able to experience this boss fight on the iPhone version, I have a lot of struggles with this fight on the iPhone version, mainly because the touchscreen controls wasn't exactly the most responsive as far as I would like to will be, but thankfully though, much like the forms of how it does it in Sonic 1 and Sonic 2, as well as Sonic CD on the iOS version, you can use the actual Bluetooth controller to make the entire experience for Sonic 4 Episode 2 on the iPhone version a lot more manageable. Unlike in Episode 1 though, you can't do that for some reason, so I can totally see why about the fact that some people prefer Episode 2 over Episode 1, at least from some extent. So yeah, basically though, in order to able to deal with the damage on Metal Sonic in his ship right here, is about the fact that you have to dodge his lasers, as you can tell, and also about the fact that you have to time it well enough until you're able to, well, despite I did somehow miss, by the way, but thankfully though, the actual, the boss fight itself is actually not too shabby sometimes, even though it can be difficult sometimes because of the forms of this unpredictable attack patterns he's going to be doing next. But aside from all that stuff though, yeah, this boss is not too shabby, unless if you try to use Supersonic, then it'll make the entire boss fight a total joke, especially concerning for the fact that you're able to become invincible, and you name the rest of it though. So either way though, yeah, nothing else I can say, although I would have liked able to talk more details about other stuff in general, but let's just say, as far as at this point in time though, is about the fact that I'm just, you know, super excited about the forms of Sonic X Shadow Generations coming up until 5 days from now, and generally speaking, I was about the fact that hopefully we'll plant something out of it until that game comes out either way. So anyway though, oh jeez, that was close. And I get the strong feeling about the fact he's now going to be doing a different attack, which as a result that we now need to charge directly at him by simply dodging not only lasers, but as well as the forms of those peculiar enemies. And as soon as he's almost down, well, we now need to dodge a lot. I mean a lot of Eggman's missiles. But again, on the iPhone version, if you use touch controls, it'd be a painful process. So as a result, thankfully though, on the console version, I somehow did this on my first try. So not too shabby, and despite the fact that Metal Sonic did somehow got away, so this means we're not exactly done with Metal Sonic just yet, alongside with Eggman, which as a result though, similar to Episode 1, if you think we are basically done, well, technically speaking though, we've only got one more zone left, so generally speaking though, there's nothing else we can really say about it, and it's also about the fact that we might come across into the final zone in the entire Sonic 4 itself. So anyways, let's go ahead and open this up. And relatively speaking though, as far as you can definitely tell, we got the endings off this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 2. It's that we're about to end things off with the entire game by experiencing the final zone in the game, known as Death Egg Mark II. Oh, this sounds interesting. So I'll see you guys until our next weekend. Later, fellas.